Good morning. Welcome to Backchat. I'm Hugh Chewitton, your co-host today, Danny Gittings. Danny, good morning to you.
Good morning.
In our main topic this morning, we're talking about independence and the law. Is it actually illegal to say that you want Hong Kong to leave the PRC? And if so, what law is broken? Can you support independence and stand for LegCo? Because the administration is saying you can't. And the Housing Authority this week has been stopping candidates from distributing leaflets that say, quote, self-determination should include the option of independence, and that propose amending the constitution to redefine the relationship between Hong Kong and China to implement a true autonomous rule. Alan Hu, for one, says the Hong Kong National Party, for example, wants to topple the Chinese People's Government's sovereignty in Hong Kong, a behaviour of incitement according to the law and a crime endangering the country's security. What do you think? Are there legal differences, for example, between talking about independence, advocating it and actually doing something to bring it about? Email us with your thoughts, questions and comments. Our address backchat@rthk.hk. Our Facebook page is Backchat on RTHK Radio 3. You can comment there or call us 233 88266 after 9:20. That's rubbish bins planned for our country trails. Joining us this morning, we have on the line Lawrence Ma, who's a barrister, chairman of the China-Australia Legal Exchange Foundation. In our central studio, Phyllis Kwong, the practicing solicitor, president of the Asia Pacific Law Association. Joseph Lam, who's a barrister, and Carol Peterson, former director of the University of Hong Kong Centre for Comparative and Public Law, now at the University of Hawaii, will be joining us on the line later in the programme. Phyllis Kwong, maybe we'll start with you. Good morning. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. This is something we have talked about before, obviously, and it has been coming up, and it was a big topic in the spring, I guess, this year. But it was really brought to the fore while we were away on Backchat with this requirement for legislators or candidates to sign this form saying that they would stand by the basic law and so on, and then screening out of certain legislators following that. First of all, do you think that was constitutional? Do you think that was fair? Do you think that was right? Do you think that was legal to screen legislators or candidates for LegCo according to those principles?
Well, I like you use the word constitutional. Well, I must declare that I am not a member of any political parties or I don't have any, specific political platform as such. But if we look at Hong Kong under the framework of the Constitution and also the Basic Law, I don't think there is any screening as such. It is just a more expressed declaration, expression of what it means by allegiance to the Basic Law.
And then people who sign it are still disqualified, aren't they?
I think there is a case.
We've never seen that before, have we? And it's going to be very interesting when we have a court case.
This is the first time I would say why there is such a measure at this time. I don't know. I think we have to ask the election committee or whatever. And I think that there is a case before the court, although the hearing date is not going to be before the election day. So I think all the arguments, I think we would leave it to the court to decide the legality of it. But then I wouldn't say legal or illegal in the sense that under the Hong Kong legal framework, but within the framework of the Basic Law, within the Hong Kong's constitutional framework, I think this is something which is quite legitimate.
You've been quite careful in your words there. It just seems like you like many other lawyers I've spoken to, are very, very unsure whether the government's going to prevail in the ultimate court case after the elections.
Well, to be quite honest, I'm not an expert in election law. Two, I myself, I have to be frank, have great doubt as to what specific law might have been infringed. Hong Kong law might have been infringed.
You mean by the disqualified candidates? What specific law might have been infringed?
Yeah, I haven't done any in-depth research on it. And as you say, as a lawyer, I have to be very, very careful.
OK, well, let's bring in some more legal views. Sitting next to you is Joseph Lamb, barrister. Mr. Lamb, good morning. Thank you for joining the show.
Thank you for having me.
I mean, in overall terms, this is the first time we've really discussed this issue of disqualification on Backchat. Well, what do you make of this situation where some candidates get disqualified, others who say similar things don't get disqualified? Returning officers say they don't believe forms that people have signed.
Yes, well, first of all, unlike Phyllis, I'm a member of a sort of quasi-political party, but I do think that on this question, which is very much legal, I had to do some research. So I must also admit that when I first looked at the problem, I thought that I agreed with Audrey Yu, who said that this declaration is unnecessary and it wasn't done in the past, so it shouldn't be done now. But having looked into the law, I must say I came to Ronnie Tong's conclusion that what the government has done might be legal. The point being that there are various ordinances, such as the Electrical Ordinance, the Electoral Affairs Commission Ordinance, and the regulation that follows. It does seem that the returning officer needs to be satisfied that the candidate has pledged allegiance to the basic law and will uphold the basic law. And therefore, if he or she wasn't satisfied with it, then the candidate cannot be eligible to stand.
Yes, but how about the situation where the candidate, the returning officer, looks behind the declarations, that starts reading people's Facebook postings and so on?
Indeed, this is the difficult bit. I mean, I did think long and hard about it. I think this is a really controversial point. I'm not comfortable with the returning officer looking into people's Facebook and looking for extra evidence themselves without there ever being submitted by Edward Leung or other candidates. But I mean, we can go into the detailed law, particularly
Maybe,
chapter.
This is fine. That's for
Chapter
radio program.
5.1d.
Let's stick to general principles.
But it does seem that in the law it says that the returning officer has the power to satisfy himself or herself. And that's where the question is, and I do think that we'll have to leave it to the court to decide.
We've got a lot of lawyers on the show this morning, bringing in a third lawyer, Lawrence Ma, barrister and chair of the China-Australia Legal Exchange Foundation, a regular guest on Backchat, including on discussing this topic of independence. So good morning again, Mr. Ma.
Morning, Danny. I haven't seen you back for a long time. And you got left off for summer, haven't you?
Yeah, well, Backchat's just returned this week from the summer. We missed some of the excitement. Now, what do you make of our discussion so far? First of all, we've got various issues to discuss here, but first of all, on the issue of disqualifications and the point we were just discussing with Joseph Lamb, particularly about returning officers looking behind these forms and looking at people's Facebook postings, as they did in the case of Edward Leung.
Yes. I've written a very detailed article on Ming Pao, and the law, the applicable law in this situation, is Section 4 of the Electoral Affairs Commission Ordinance, which provided that an election officer has to ensure that an election is, inter alia, conducted honestly. So if you, as a electoral affairs officer, look into the conduct of any application or even the entire process of this legislative council election, the election affairs officer has to ensure everything is conducted honestly. Now, if the election applicant has signed a form, and there is belief that when that person signs that form, there is a reasonable ground to believe that the person hasn't signed it with honesty, then the electoral affairs officer has a duty to make inquiry, which is part of the power and function of an electoral affairs officer under the ordinance. And he has to ensure an election is conducted properly and honestly. And to discharge that function, he would have to look into extrinsic materials and evidence to ensure that, for example, in this situation when the form is signed, whether the person signing the form is done so honestly.
So where does this stop? Should the returning officers be hiring private investigators and so on to go off and to check whether candidates' declarations are really accurate? Lawrence Ma?
Well, I don't think it would require that to happen, but as to what is the ambit of that duty, he would have to feed himself with information and or be supplied with information to make an administrative decision, which, as like other administrators of the government, like when you apply for Social Security, if there is evidence to show that you have adequate assets and you have not been may not be truly so making a declaration on the form, then they can look into evidence like that.
And how about the other aspect of this law as well? I mean, you know yourself that one of the fundamental principles of rule of law is consistency, and that the courts hate it when they see government officials acting in what might be perceived to be an arbitrary way. I mean, here you have a candidate, Edward Leung, who was allowed to stand in one LegCo election and then gets disqualified in the next LegCo election, while at the same time other candidates who are saying the same sort of things are allowed to stand. I mean, surely there's some issue of consistency here at the very least.
Oh yeah, well for that I agree. I mean, you see other people who's gone in are very very pro-independence too. On that I can't comment because I'm not the electoral affairs officer having all the factual evidence before me to make a decision. But apparently, you see, this is what you're suggesting is correct. Some people got in, some people don't.
Yeah. So at the very least, there's an issue of consistency, or we would say, of whether there's been arbitrary decisions here.
I mean, Phyllis Kwong.
Oh yeah.
Phyllis, it looks like political screening. It is political screening, isn't it?
Well, let's go back to the basic principles. Now we're talking about principles rather than the technicality. No, the basic principle is that anyone standing for LegCo who want to be part of the LegCo, governing mechanism in Hong Kong, must allege to the basic law, and anyone advocating separatism must be disqualified from standing from election, and those officials having the responsibility to ensure that there will be compliance with the constitutional framework of Hong Kong in the election has the duty to look at that. But whether they have exercised that duty, whether they have exercised that power correctly or wisely, is something to be judged by the public as well as the court, as now it is. But then they do have the power and they do have the duty to do that.
Okay, so I can see that. What if you say after 2047 you think Hong Kong should be independent? Is that in line?
Sorry.
If you said that you thought that Hong Kong after 2047, after the expiry of the Basic Law, should be independent, is that?
No. That one, there is no expiry date for the Basic Law. The Basic Law is effective now. It is effective before 2047, and it will be effective after 2047, unless it is amended or it is terminated by the Standing Committee of the People's. What is it? Yandai.
The Standing Committee of the National People's Congress.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes, although it would be the full National People's Congress, actually.
Yeah. Let me repeat. There is no expiry date for the Basic Law. It is effective now. It is effective 2047. It is effective after 2047.
Can you say that you want to amend the Constitution?
Well, the Basic Law had been amended many times before, if you recall.
And so have all constitutions.
Well, the main text of the Basic Law has never been amended. I mean, we've amended the annexes, which is rather different.
The Constitution of the People's Republic has been replaced many times, actually, hasn't
it? Well, that's true. Yeah. That's true. But through the proper procedure, through the proper
so there is a procedure.
I
mean,
mechanism. There is a procedure.
Yeah.
But it is not for the Hong Kong people.
So it's not for the Hong Kong people?
It is not for the Hong Kong people to amend it.
Hugh, you do raise a very interesting point, one which I've been wondering about if you had a candidate, which we didn't seem to this time. I mean, those who say they want independence or they want to amend the basic law now, they didn't say when they wanted to amend the basic law to introduce independence, but if you had a candidate who said, I only want to amend the basic law after 2047, to have independence, then whether you could disqualify such a candidate as advocating something contrary to the basic law would be much, much more difficult. You may well find some candidate emerges to say that at some stage.
And let me say something about independence. There is a problem with maybe it's translation. Independence in itself, depending on in what context it is. Well, in the basic law, we have independent judiciary, and there's nothing wrong about it. And we all think that it is a very sacred part of the basic law. So independence, depending on what it is, we need to have independent thinking in critical powers. Something like that. It is okay, right? It is okay. And of course, in translation, independent, autonomy, self-determination, whatever. Autonomy, in Chinese we say 獨立, right? But, again, it is depending on in what context. Of course, the basic law itself guarantees a high degree of autonomy for Hong Kong. Well, but of course, if you're looking for absolute autonomy, well, that is not something that the basic law, is designed for. But it guarantees a high degree of autonomy.
Again, I mean, you said it's not for the people of Hong Kong to determine how the basic law should be amended. But if I say, well, I think it should be for the people of Hong Kong to determine how the basic law should be amended, or that they should play a part in it, which is what, for example, it seems that the LSDs, that's their kind of stance. Is that in breach of the basic law? Would that bar me from distributing leaflets? Would that bar me from standing in LegCo? How far back do you go?
I'm totally with you. That,
you know what I mean? Because that means you can't even discuss it.
I'm totally with you.
We should be switching off the transmitters now.
No, I'm totally with you in saying that the Hong Kong people must play a part in any amendment, if there is going to be an amendment of the basic law. The Hong Kong people must play a part. Remember, when the basic law was promulgated, or before that was promulgated, the Hong Kong people actually had participated actively in the promulgation of the basic law. And any amendment, even if the amendment of an annex to the basic law, the Hong Kong people has always participated. They always have a voice. And I think that the central government, if there is going to be any amendment of the basic law in the future, the central government would not ignore the voice of the Hong Kong people. They will ensure that the voice of Hong Kong people will be heard.
So you should be able to say we should be able to amend the basic law to give the independence to Hong Kong.
No, not independence. I mean independence in the sense that separate from the sovereignty of PRC government. That is something. Separatism is a non-option for Hong Kong. Practically it is. Everybody knows that it can't be done. We don't have an army in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
How can we? We don't have an army. I mean, are you going to fight for Hong Kong's independence like Gandhi? Are you going to do that?
There are students now who are talking about doing it. Shows how far the debate has come. They have been talking about doing that kind of thing.
Yeah, but that is self-destructive,
Okay, but of course Singapore has made a go of it.
Well, Singapore was independent because it was expelled by Malaysia.
Okay,
Lawrence Ma. Now, as we were saying earlier, some pro-independence candidates were disqualified, others weren't. And looking at the opinion polls, almost certainly some of them are going to be elected. What's going to happen then? Should they be allowed to take their seats in the Legislative Council? I mean, it'd be very interesting to see whether they're willing to swear the oath, which of course they have to do. Remember, Longhair, when he was first elected, had trouble with that oath and I think mumbled parts of it. But if they're willing to do so, should they? They've been validly declared as candidates by the returning officer. If they are then elected, should they be? But they advocate Hong Kong independence. They do not uphold the basic law, or that they might be prepared to repeat the oath saying they uphold the basic law. Should they be allowed to take their seats as members of the Legislative Council?
I think they would not be stupid enough not to at least swear to the satisfaction of the Legislative Council Secretariat the oath. I think they would not go through an election process and then got themselves disqualified for not swearing the oath.
So could they be disqualified after election?
Well, you mean because of they're not willing to swear the oath of allegiance?
Well, the same sort of principle the returning officer applied, that you don't really believe their oath.
I don't think that there is a power to disqualify an elected member of the Legislative Council because of an oath not being sworn properly. Take the example of Wong Yuk Man, who has been pretty playful in his past oath of allegiance swearing, and he hasn't been disqualified. I haven't seen people being disqualified. Any examples of that in my research in other jurisdictions. Yes.
So we'll almost certainly we'll have pro-independence members of the Legislative Council after the elections. Almost certainly, if the polls
the worry is being that they would publicly promulgate Hong Kong independence inside chambers, and they would have legal protections under the I think the Legislative Council ordinance protecting which provides for absolute privileges in their speeches in main Parliament. So they would have double protections. One is Article 27, freedom of expression as applicable to an ordinary Hong Kong citizen, as to Hong Kong residents, and the other is an extra protection afforded to Legislative Council for speeches made in Legislative Council.
And what happens when they try and move motion debates on Hong Kong independence? I'm sure they'll try and do that once they're inside the Legislative Council.
You can't do that then, because under the basic law, apparent members' group doesn't cover the legal system of Hong Kong, so you can't. Apparent members' group doesn't cover that sort of thing. So it can be done. It can only be promulgated by the government.
Well, I mean, you've had legislative councils moving motion debates on June the 4th, all kinds of things in the past. No one's tried to move one on Hong Kong independence, but looks like we're going to have some legislators in the next LegCo who probably will want to test the limits on that kind of thing.
Well, technically you can, but I mean, the Legislative Council Secretary wanted to allow it.
Well, yes.
Wanting to, I mean, legally you really can't, because it's really a matter of the political system in Hong Kong.
Okay, some interesting emails from Jalal. One in particular I'd like to refer to, which says, this is from Jalal, it's addressed, the subject line, Phyllis Kwan. Jalal says, where is the legal requirement to pledge allegiance to the basic law? Where is the legal prohibition against advocating independence? There is none. Come on, Hugh, ask tougher questions, says Jalal. Well, let me just save perhaps Ms. Kwan the problem that legislators do have to swear that they will promise that they will uphold the basic law. They will uphold the basic law. Yes, but of course, people outside you and I, who are not standing for LegCo, don't have to make that kind of promise. And so the second question that Jalal asks is where is the legal prohibition against advocating independence? Where do you stand on this? Because Bernard Chan and Alan Hu seem to be a little bit more equivocal. Alan Hu basically says that you should be arrested if you advocate independence in Hong Kong. What do you think? Can I ask you, Phyllis Kwong, first of all? Is it against the law to advocate independence in Hong Kong?
To advocate
Mm.
independence? Well, that is... Well, I would say unless and until Article 33 had been promulgated, I'm not sure that there is any. Of course, there are learned friends like Tan Man Kei, who also mentioned that there are, quoted a number of legislative provisions saying that advocating independence or separatism in Hong Kong infringes the criminal law.
Amounts to sedition.
I'm quoting her. That is Chapter 200, Article 9 and 10. and others, and like and 11
that's the laws
and
on
so
sedition
on.
and treason.
Yes, that's right.
Sedition,
Yeah.
We have actually discussed this on this programme a number of times before,
Yeah.
and generally the consensus we've always reached, and Lawrence Marr came on this when he was on the show previously, was that there are enough exceptions in those provisions in the criminal law, in particular saying that if you want to discuss, if you want to try and change the system, then that is not sedition. That
If you do it by lawful means.
Yes, quite apart from the fact that these provisions are extremely old, and there are, I'm sure Carol Peterson will say after the news, it's very difficult to see whether they could necessarily be enforceable in the courts.
Well, if it is arrestable offence, I would think that the DOJ would have advised the police to take action.
So you tend to think it isn't?
I don't know. Maybe they're still considering.
What's your view?
I don't know. I don't know. A particular individual. They have what they say, what they do. The evidence and everything. But we know that the sedition and everything is Cap 200. All those provisions had not been enforced for many years. So I don't know. I have doubt whether those are, arrestable offence. Not to say whether when they go to the court, what kind of with the evidence and whether a conviction can be obtained.
Yeah, it is striking when you look at the ordinance. Apart from the fact that it's all about the Queen,
yeah.
They talk about
well, the Queen is replaced by the central government.
It's about pirates and it's about drilling. It's about the evolution of arms, which I don't think has happened for about 200 years in anywhere in the world. Anyway, okay, let's break for the news now at 9 o'clock. We'll be back. There's going to be sunny periods today with some haze and a very hot temperature of about 33 degrees, 29 degrees at the moment with very hot weather warning. Relative humidity is at 77%.
Listening to the news on RTHK.
Welcome back. This is Backchat on a Friday morning with Danny Gittings and me, Hugh Chiverton. What do you think of the music, Danny? It's the first time you heard it, isn't it?
Well, I've been listening to Backchat all week, yes.
Yeah.
It's like any change. There's a lot of traditionalists. It will take some time to get used to.
Okay, right. As long as it's changed by lawful methods.
Yes.
That's acceptable. Okay, well, we're talking about the issue of the legality of independence, particularly as it applies to candidates for the Legislative Council, but also as it applies to everybody else. Not so much the education angle this morning. We have with us in our central studio Joseph Lam, a barrister, practicing solicitor, president of the Asia Pacific Law Association, Phyllis Kwong, and Lawrence Marr's gone now, actually, I beg your pardon. We're also joined now by Carol Peterson, who's a professor in the School of Law at the University of Hawaii, formerly in Hong Kong, as director of the University of Hong Kong Centre for Comparative and Public Law. Oh, Danny, do you want to make a declaration, by the way, while you're here?
Well, I mean, I'm part of Hong Kong U space as well. I work there, and I'm a PhD student at the law faculty. Okay,
and later in the programme we're also going to be talking about this idea of doing away with rubbish bins on country trails. The government's tried it out, and they found that reducing the number of rubbish bins on hiking trails reduced the amount of rubbish, so they're going to go further with that. We'll be talking about the pros and cons of that with Angus Ho. Now, we want to hear from you. Our email address is backchat@rthk.hk. If you send us an email, we'll do our best to read it out. Jalal, for example, says, is it not disturbing that the government have not clearly spelled out the legal basis of these disqualifications? Might be legal or might be illegal is not good enough. The law is clear. Candidates must submit a form, including the declaration, and sign it. We have all read the correspondence of the returning officers. They say clearly that the candidates sign such declarations. I weep for Hong Kong's rule of law, says Jalal. Thank you very much indeed for that comment. And on our Facebook page, some long comments from TC and Henry. I'll have to edit a little bit, but I do recommend that you go to our Facebook page, Backchat and RTHK Radio 3, and read them for yourself, and feel free to respond where everyone can see it. TC says, first, there's a difference between constitutional law and criminal law. There's nothing wrong for private citizens to advocate something unconstitutional. In the case of Hong Kong independence, until Article 23 legislation has been passed, there's no law prohibiting anything related to advocating independence. One could even argue that it's not unconstitutional to discuss discuss or advocate Hong Kong independence after 30th of June 2047. There are examples of which the oath of office doesn't prevent individuals with conflicting beliefs to enter office. In Canada, every member of Parliament or provincial legislature is required to take an oath of office, swearing allegiance to the Queen of Canada and her successor when entering office. However, this procedure doesn't prevent individuals who support Quebec independence from becoming candidates in elections or becoming MPs. In Australia, while Malcolm Turnbull is a Republican, it doesn't prevent him from becoming an MP or the Prime Minister, as their respective oaths require the office holder to support the Queen of Australia and her successor. Henry says, as the basic law states that Hong Kong is an inseparable part of China, to talk about such is dangerous because 1, it could develop to a separatist movement and or revolution. 2, no business wants to operate in a riotous territory. Hong Kong people would suffer. 3, should people get turned on and Hong Kong is in a riot for independence, would Beijing do nothing? Also, folks don't care much about finer differences between talk about, advocating or similar actions. When a legislator advocates independence in LegCo, including when disguised as self-determination, it would create an untenable solution where a lawmaking body and an SAR within China talks about independence. Such would constitute a destabilising force in the mainland. Like the East Turkestan movement and the Dalai Lama's movement. Surely China would do something. There's the thoughts of Henry and TC. If you agree or disagree, drop us a line, backchat@rthk.hk, or you can call us.
And indeed, we have David Webb on the line, who has called us. David Webb, good morning.
Good morning.
What are your thoughts?
Yes, I felt compelled to intervene. I don't normally call in, but none of your panellists has made the points that some of your email writers just did. And that is that there is nothing wrong with wishing to change laws or constitutions while simultaneously agreeing to uphold them. And one of your email writers just now gave plentiful examples of members of countries who have joined their parliaments whilst wishing to separate various regions of their countries. Another one would be Catalonia in Spain, probably. And Scotland, of course. There are plenty of Scottish MPs. Indeed, nearly all the Scottish MPs are separatists and serving in the UK Parliament.
Well, but Britain doesn't have a written constitution. In the case of Hong Kong, David Webb, you write so extensively on these issues, I'm sure you're aware. Yeah. There are limits to the lawful changes that you can make to the basic law, at least before 2047. And
any change to the basic law, currently there are procedures in the basic law for that change, and that includes a 2/3 majority of the Legislative Council. They can't propose changes, they can't introduce bills, they can advocate them, but it's up to either the Hong Kong government or the Chinese government to put forward the changes for approval. But nevertheless, how could you possibly have a situation where pledging to uphold the law means agreeing with every clause of it at the same time as voting to change it? So that highlights the ludicrousy of suggesting that just because you would like to change some aspect of the basic law means that you're not serious when you say you will uphold it until it's changed.
Do you think that there's nothing?
The powers of the returning officers are very clearly spelt out in the local law, and they must decide whether a person is validly nominated, but they can't second guess people's intents or other views and screen them out. There are basically tests on whether there are the correct number of signatures, the correct number of nominators, whether they've paid their deposit and so forth. These are very mechanical procedures. And clearly what the government is doing here is leaving itself wide open to a judicial review after the election has been held that could result in all of the elected legislators being removed and a new election being held, at least in the constituencies where some of these candidates have been rejected, if not all of them, because there's an argument that goes, well, there are other people who would have come forward who also advocate independence, but didn't even apply for nomination because of this process that the government has adopted through the returning officers. So we're going to have, quite likely, another election next year to allow those who have been unfairly excluded to take part.
Okay, thank you very much. That was David Webb. Thank you very much. Let's bring in Carol Peterson. Carol Peterson, Professor at the School of Law, University of Hawaii, and former Director of the University of Hong Kong's Centre for Comparative and Public Law. Ms. Peterson, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll be here next week, won't you, speaking at a number of forums on this and other issues. I'm sure you've been watching these developments in Hong Kong very closely. It's the first time we've had you on the programme since the returning officers' disqualifications. What do you make of that whole episode?
Well, yes, I've been following it very closely, and I am arriving in Hong Kong this weekend. First of all, I'd like to say David Webb did an excellent job of summarizing a lot of what I planned to say. I think he's spot on, and I think he's made some accurate predictions about what's likely to happen after the judicial review. There's no question in my mind it is not illegal to advocate peacefully for independence. There's simply nothing in the crimes ordinance that could possibly be used to prohibit peaceful advocating for independence. At the same time, I think it's unwise, and I am more worried about Hong Kong than I've ever been because of the increased tension between the people of Hong Kong and the central and local governments. I do think politically it would be much more wise for our young people and our pro-democracy movement to explicitly advocate for internal self-determination. That is what the Basic Law provides. That's what one country, two systems should provide if it's faithfully implemented. I think the real problem here is that every time the central or local government feels threatened recently, they come down very hard on the pro-democracy and localist movements. And it is counterproductive. All it does is it increases the sense among our young people that one country, two systems has failed them and is not worth saving. And I think that's a mistaken assumption. There's been a lot of bumps in the road this year. The abduction of Li Bo is the worst threat to one country, two systems. And I think right now what the central and local governments need to do is to reassure people that their civil liberties are protected in Hong Kong and will be protected. And unfortunately, this declaration and these claims that people shouldn't be talking about independence has the complete opposite effect. It is only going to increase the sense of disillusionment among our young people. And so I'm very, very worried about the future of Hong Kong. But I completely agree with David Webb. I mean, what the government is doing is almost certainly going to be the subject of a successful judicial review ultimately.
Are you sure the courts will uphold their... this is a very sensitive issue indeed. There have already been suggestions denied by the government that if there was any danger of the government losing, you might see an interpretation from the Standing Committee. I mean, that raises difficult issues because you're primarily talking about Hong Kong law here on the Basic Law, but it's certainly not impossible.
Well, that's exactly what I mean when I say it's politically risky. I do have confidence in our local courts, and I particularly think that the arbitrary fashion in which this new requirement is being applied. I mean, even one of your guests, Phyllis Wong, agreed. I mean, everyone is concerned about this arbitrary fashion. You know, we're going to ban you from running, but not you. We allowed you to run once before with the same kind of discourse, and now we're going to ban you. I cannot imagine that the local courts will think that that complies with the government's obligations under the Basic Law and the ICCPR. But I am very, very worried that the NPC Standing Committee might decide to try to head that off with an interpretation of the Basic Law. I'm even becoming worried that the NPC Standing Committee might try to exercise its powers under Article 18 and try to apply some sort of national law to Hong Kong. I'm also worried that this will be used as an excuse to restart the process of legislating under Article 23, and I think it's the wrong time to do that because things are so tense right now in Hong Kong. So the plea that I'm going to make next week when I'm at Hong Kong U is that everyone step back a little bit from the abyss, that those who care about promoting democracy and protecting autonomy in Hong Kong make it clear that at least for now, all they are arguing for is internal self-determination. And to be honest, that's probably all that Hong Kong could ever get, because regardless of the legality of advocating for it, the truth is that the international community places a very high value on the right of a country to maintain its territorial integrity. It is very, very rare in international law that a right to internal self-determination turns into a right to external self-determination. Very rare circumstances. And so I think the politically wise thing to do for Hong Kong right now is for the pro-democracy and pro-autonomy movements to identify very strongly with peaceful advocacy for internal self-determination. And the wise thing for both governments, both the central and local governments, to do is to step back from this increasingly threatening discourse and reassure the people of Hong Kong that its autonomy will be protected and its civil liberties will be maintained.
Let's bring some of our other guests back in. Joseph Lam, we haven't heard from you for a while. Carol Peterson using very strongly. Actually talked about an abyss in Hong Kong. I mean, do you, as on the ground, and you an election candidate, weren't you, in district council? Is that your feeling?
Well, no. First of all, I'm not as optimistic as Carol, pessimistic, depending on your point of view, as to what the court would decide in the end. Should there be a judicial review?
You don't think it's such a clear-cut case?
I don't think it's as clear-cut. I think the court would be very reluctant to get involved into this highly sensitive issue. So I honestly...
I mean, there'll be an election petition. Surely
yes,
it would be an election petition rather than a GAR, so they have to
you're quite right. The election petition is more likely to be happening. But as I said at the beginning of the program, I reckon the returning officer might have certain powers to do what he or she did.
How about Carol Peterson's point, which is I would also share, that the real issue for a court here will be the rather arbitrary nature of the returning officer's rulings.
That is quite right. I do share that concern too, and I can't quite understand why some candidates were allowed to stand in the end. But that depends on what the returning officer's explanation.
You know how much the courts hate. I mean, they say that one of the fundamental principles of the rule of law is you shouldn't have arbitrary rulings.
That is quite true. I think I did say at the beginning of the program that this is going to be the really the key point for the court to decide. But I do think that, and in fact, I do want to talk a little bit about education, as we didn't really touch upon it. We know that the government is now saying that separatism, independence, shouldn't be talked about in schools. Now, I do think that is interfering with academic freedom, although we do need to define what academic freedom is. I mean, if we are talking about issues that Hong Kong independence will bring about, that could be academic, and I think students should be free to discuss it with the teachers. But on the other hand, if the teacher or the school is advocating independence, then that's on.
Well, you're not going to get a school advocating independence, are you? I can imagine some teachers in Hong Kong advocating independence. It's probably only a matter of time before that issue does arise. But it's not going to happen with a school. But how about when a student wants to write a term? I mean, they're doing liberal studies or something. They want to write their term. You get to choose your term paper. You write on Hong Kong independence.
I think they should be completely allowed to do that. And I do think that it's only through free discussion that the truth will.
Island School have organised a debate, for example. They organised a public debate over whether Hong Kong should be independent or not.
Phyllis Kwong, should we allow that?
No, I just want to step back just a little bit. You know what? This is not. Let's not confine it or define it as a legal issue. It is more than a legal issue. It is a political issue. It is a cultural issue. It is a social issue. But what benefit would it bring to Hong Kong to advocate for independence of Hong Kong? I mean, why are people doing this? I mean, whether it is peaceful or violent, but why would you want to, Carol, or any people, why do you want to advocate for independence of Hong Kong?
Well, let's bring Carol Peterson's not advocating independence. Were you, Carol Peterson?
It's all right. It is all right to advocate for independence.
Let's let Carol Peterson respond. Yes.
I actually don't think it's a good idea to advocate for independence. I think I said very clearly that if I were there, I would be arguing that we should be advocating very strongly for internal self-determination, which does not involve independence. But let me finish, please just let me finish. But you do not judge the right to express views by the quality of the views. the whole point of freedom of expression is that you do not prevent someone from expressing something just because you don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I do agree with you, but there is a boundary to that freedom of you don't advocate for independence of Hong Kong because it is not constitutional. 2, it is not beneficial to Hong Kong people as a whole. Everybody knows. You know, I know.
No, I disagree with you fundamentally on that. First of all, Article 159 sets forth a process by which the basic law could be amended. And as David Webb said, there's nothing inconsistent with a legislator saying, I declare that I will uphold the basic law, but at the same time saying, I'm going to advocate for an amendment to the basic law.
But hang on, Carol Peterson. There are restrictions under Article 159 on amending the basic law, and we don't want to go into too much technicalities, but essentially they're saying you can't amend the basic law in a way that goes against fundamental parts of the joint declaration, which certainly include Hong Kong being part of China.
It says you cannot contradict the basic policies of the central government towards Hong Kong.
And Hong Kong being part of China is certainly one of those.
But Article 159 can be amended just like any other article in the basic law. It is a national law passed by the NPC. It was not even passed through a particularly higher process. I mean, it's much less rigid, for example, than the U.S. Constitution, which could only be amended if 3/5 of the state legislatures approve it. My point is that I do agree with Phyllis that it's not good for Hong Kong to have all of this talk of independence because I'm terrified of how the central government may respond. I think the central government may be very foolish and respond by cracking down even harder. So I don't think it's a great idea, but you don't prohibit freedom of expression just because you think that someone's expression isn't a good idea. I mean, if I were going to apply that to the United States, I'd stop everyone from expressing their views in favor of the right to bear arms. I can't do that. I disagree with the right to bear arms, but they have the right to articulate their views. That's what a free society is all about. That's what distinguishes Hong Kong from mainland China. And Phyllis, if you end that freedom of expression, you destroy Hong Kong.
We'll let Phyllis Kwong respond there.
No. I do not. As I say, freedom of speech, like any freedom, is not absolute. There is a boundary to it. And in this context, advocating independence is unconstitutional. It is against the Constitution of China. It is against the Joint Declaration, and it's not good for Hong Kong.
Carol Peterson, we're drawing towards a close here, but I just wanted to go back to your words about Hong Kong staring into the abyss. Do you really think we're staring into an abyss here?
I'm very concerned, yes, I really am. Largely because I think everything is escalating and it's getting out of control. And it's ironic, I think, how threatened the central government seems to feel. I suspect it's because the central government is feeling very vulnerable. The economy is not doing as well in China as it was. They've lost this arbitration against the Philippines. There have been other problems in China that I think frankly, they're making the Chinese Communist Party feel very vulnerable. And that's a dangerous situation for Hong Kong. So I do think that we have to be very careful not to poke a stick in the eye of the Chinese Communist Party right now. So I am very nervous about that. Ironically, trying to prohibit the pro-independence candidates from running from LegCo might actually help the Pan-Democrats, because I suspect that those candidates would probably dilute the vote for the Pan-Democrats. I was just listening to some of the coverage of the super seats, and it may well have that effect. If you pull candidates out, those votes are likely to go to the Pan-Democrats. So it makes me wonder, why would the central and local governments want to prevent these people from running when, in fact, preventing them from running may actually just send more votes to the Pan-Democrats and votes away from the pro-establishment candidates? I can only think it's because they're not thinking clearly. They're just responding so strongly to this pro-independence rhetoric that they're not thinking strategically. So I think that the people of Hong Kong need to think strategically and need to back away from the abyss and try to reassure China that we are not trying to promote a secessionist movement, but rather we're simply trying to regain the original understanding of one country, two systems. the whole talk of independence is also diverting attention from some very important issues. I mean, such as, what about the abduction of Li Bo? Why have people not been reassured that this will not happen? I know of people who are worried about traveling back to Hong Kong right now because they may have a foreign passport, but they are also originally born and raised in Hong Kong and they're Chinese. And they're nervous about what might happen to them. If that kind of issue is not being addressed because we're so busy talking about whether or not you should be allowed to say the word independence, then Hong Kong is going to lose its competitive advantage in the world, and it's going to lose its reputation as a genuinely free society. So I do think we need to try to scale down the rhetoric and try to resolve these conflicts in a very peaceful, respectful manner. And that's what I'm going to be trying to talk about next week at Hong Kong U.
Professor Peterson, thank you very much indeed for joining us from the School of Law at the University of Hawaii. We could talk about the situation in Hawaii as well, which is another kettle of fish for another day. Thank you very much indeed.
We have a pro-independence movement.
I know you do, yeah, but you also have laws against secession, don't you, I think, in the US since the Civil War. Anyway, let's not go there.
There is absolutely no problem with advocating for independence in Hawaii.
All right, okay. It's Phyllis Kwong, thank you very much indeed, practicing solicitor and president of the Asia Pacific Law Association, and Joseph Lamb, barrister. Thank you all very much indeed. On Facebook, Francis, sorry, couldn't get through, says, is there, as it would seem, a difference to be drawn between seeking to change the political order through constitutional means and seeking to change by extra-legal means? And as all of the objecting arguments would have been thought through by the Justice Department before implementing the loyalty oath and by not defining it clearly and going ahead anyway, is it not possible that the real target is not the radicals but the judiciary, asks Francis. Bowen says, what balks me is that anybody who listens to the news at all will know that many politicians, including some legislators in the pro-establishment camp, have openly made statements that go against specific provisions of the Basic Law. Those who said the FCs should stay as they serve a vital function were essentially making a statement against Article 84, for example. Rimsky-Yuan has openly stated all provisions of the Basic Law have to be equally respected and none stands above the others. So why are those pro-establishment candidates not disqualified? I completely agree with David Webb's point that one can uphold the Basic Law while seeking legitimate channels to change it. In fact, seeking to amend it peacefully and legitimately is proof of respect for the law itself. Other than the path of seeking an amendment for the Basic Law through the route stated therein, I understand that the Basic Law is just an ordinary piece of legislation of the NPC, as opposed to part of the Chinese Constitution, and can be repealed by the NPC should it choose to do so at any time. Someone who tries to persuade the central government that it's better for both Hong Kong and China to go their own ways, for instance, cannot be said to be not upholding the Basic Law while the Basic Law still stands. Bowen, thank you very much indeed for that. Finally, today we wanted to go to the issue of bins in hiking trails in Hong Kong. The government have been trying an experiment where they stopped bins being put out along hiking trails in order to reduce waste, and it seems to have been a success, and they're going to extend it by cutting back the number of bins. Angus Ho joins us, Executive Director of Greeners Action. Mr. Ho, good morning to you. Hello, Angus Ho. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Yes. Hi. This idea.
Can you speed up? I can't hear very clearly. Thank you.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. Can you hear me now?
A little bit better.
Okay.
Yep.
Right. Okay. Do you agree with the government? Is this a good idea to have fewer rubbish bins?
Yes, I think the whole Hong Kong society is get ready for the waste charging in about 2-3 years. I think it is very good practice and start up to train and educate the people, especially in the country part, to reduce those rubbish bins, so that I think in other countries it is already a practice for a long time for people when they go to the trail or go to the countryside walk, they bring back their own rubbish. I think it is a very good practice. I think the most important now is the education to the public, and they know this policy is going to implement, so that they can get ready and then bring their own maybe have a bag or rubbish and go back to the city.
Isn't there a danger just people will just leave their trash behind and cause a litter problem instead?
Actually, we were one of the supporting group with the AFCD, and we have seen about maybe last year or last half years. I think the trial program was running well, and we couldn't see a lot of rubbish left behind in the countryside. I think if together with education, and sometimes they should have a monitoring or patrolling. And I think I do believe Hong Kong people and the citizens have a good social responsibility, and then they will bring back their own rubbish and go back to the town.
Okay, well, Angus O, thanks for joining us, albeit briefly, from Greenest Action, Executive Director. A couple of emails to finish off from Tom, who says he was a bit critical yesterday because we were discussing American politics, and he came back to say, sorry to backchat the programme again. I guess for Hong Kong people we are more interested to know about UGL and its payments to CY Leung, CCP high-ranking members and their private businesses in Hong Kong than the dealings of the Clinton Foundation anytime. God help us. Says Tom, and today he says governments or state policing and controlling thoughts and speech in a community is a troubled concept and is deeply anti-civil and human rights. Long live CCP and totalitarianism, says Tom. Thank you very much indeed for that. Danny, thank you very much.